Old Hollywood had its fair share of joyous times and great friendships, but it also had its share of intense rivalries and all-out feuds. And these often lasted for decades and even lifetimes. Join Factsverse as we present Old Hollywood celebrity feuds that ruined reputations forever. Bette Davis and Joan Crawford. Bette Davis and Joan Crawford might have had the most famous celebrity feud of all time. They were both legends of old Hollywood and had big personalities to go with their fame, talent, and success. As such, they had a decades-long feud that always seemed to catch the attention of the media and the general public. It started in 1935. Davis was on set, filming her role in the movie Dangerous. She went on to win an Oscar for her efforts. But as she filmed, she quickly became enamored of the man she was acting opposite, Franchot Tone. Around that time, Joan Crawford decided she wanted Tone, and despite knowing full well that Davis was dating him, Crawford swooped in and started an affair with him. Davis was devastated, and Crawford felt victorious. Crawford and Tone even got married soon after, though the marriage ended quickly, perhaps because Crawford was more into the seduction than the actual love part. Crawford added insult to injury when she made comments to the press about Bette looking unhappy. Years later, both women were cast in Whatever Happened to Baby Jayne, and it was during production on this film that their rivalry and hatred for each other really came to a head. They were apparently vicious to each other on set, making deliberate moves to each make the other miserable, and not just with words. There was a scene that asked for Davis to drag Crawford by her shoulders. Crawford, wanting to make it extra difficult, decided she would load up her pockets with rocks. The trick worked, as Bette strained her back from the multiple takes. But Davis was determined to pay it back, and reportedly kicked Joan in the head while they were filming another scene. Davis got nominated for an Oscar for her performance in that movie. Crawford didn't, but she wasn't about to let that get in the way of her efforts to sabotage Davis's night. Crawford called each of the other nominees of Bette's category and somehow convinced them to let her accept their award for them. Anne Bancroft was the actual winner of the award and allowed Crawford to get on stage and accept the award. Bette could only glare at her in anger from her seat in the audience as Joan pretended as if she'd won the award. Davis outlived Crawford, and when she was asked if she felt bad about their years of rivalry, she said, "You should only say good things about people when they die." She added, "Joan Crawford is dead. Good." Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis. Martin and Lewis were legends of comedy. Their act as a duo was revered in the late 40s and 50s, and they appeared together in 16 movies, several live tours, and many TV shows. But one day they decided to suddenly split up. While it wasn't made clear at the time, some speculated Jerry had begun to get an ego about who was the bigger star. He apparently thought he was, and perhaps he was right, and demanded they make changes to their act to reflect that. Martin was not into that, and he at the same time was growing weary of having to act in Lewis's shadow as Lewis grew in fame. Things had reportedly begun going downhill for a while until a particular magazine shoot was the last straw. The two did a shoot for Look magazine. Inside the magazine, they were both covered equally, but the magazine put Lewis only on their cover. This did not sit well with Martin, who felt Lewis had accepted that decision and perhaps even pushed for it. He apparently felt Lewis's priorities had shifted, and he was only in it for the money. The duo split up not long after that issue hit newsstands. There was also the potential rift created by Martin's wife. Not that it was any of her doing. Lewis and his wife were apparently great friends of Martin's first wife, Patty. So when Martin and Patty split, they were heartbroken. This meant they didn't end up taking kindly to the woman, Jayne, who replaced her in Martin's life. There are some who say the Martin and Lewis professional split was because of their distaste for his new wife. Regardless of the cause, the two never officially made up before they both passed away. Before we tell you more, be sure to give this video a like and subscribe to Factsverse if you haven't already. Sophia Loren and Jayne Mansfield. One of the most famous photos from old Hollywood was the one where Sophia Loren looked over towards Jayne Mansfield with disdain, as Mansfield entertained partygoers and gawkers at a big dinner event. And while it's unclear whether the feud between these two legendary beauties extended beyond this moment, it was enough to be seared into the minds of the public for decades afterwards. Mansfield was new to the industry, and her studio was eager to fet her and introduce her to the press and public. So they arranged for a lavish party, attended by other celebs, where Mansfield would be announced and the press would have opportunities to take photos of her and interview her. Mansfield further heightened interest by wearing a very low-cut dress which showed off her ample cleavage. Plus, she wasn't wearing a bra. She was seated at a table next to Sophia, who was already a star and didn't need a coming-out party. As she sat next to Sophia, Mansfield's breasts were nearly coming out of her dress, and Sophia clearly felt this was not the best impression to give. She leered at Mansfield's chest with disapproval, and a photographer caught the moment on film. Sophia later admitted she was indeed looking at Mansfield's bosom because she felt her nipples were about to pop out of her dress. She claims the look was more one of fright that Mansfield would have a wardrobe malfunction than of disapproval. But there is clearly something intense happening in her eyes in the famous photo. William Frawley and Vivian Vance. If you saw the recent film Being the Ricardos, you got to see firsthand a recreation of this infamous feud. Vivian Vance and William Frawley, who played Ethel and Fred Mertz on the long-running hit show I Love Lucy, were not fond of each other, and that's putting it way too lightly. They were basically mortal enemies from the start. Frawley was 22 years older than Vance and insisted they wouldn't be believable as a real couple, so he lobbied for her to be replaced before shooting even started. And had he been a reasonable person, that incident might have become water under the bridge. But Frawley was an alcoholic and a mean one at that. He reportedly didn't drink during shooting, however, and had to keep his hands in his pockets so audiences wouldn't see them shaking from withdrawal. And as mean a drunk as he was equally mean when sober. He and Vance would trade insults during rehearsals and on set. The feud and hatred was so intense, Vivian vowed never to work with him again after I Love Lucy ended. That meant turning down a lucrative job for a spin-off show of I Love Lucy that would have featured the couple. Marlon Brando and Frank Sinatra. The feud between these two megastars began after Marlon won an Oscar for his performance in On the Waterfront. Reportedly, Sinatra had been up for that part and didn't exactly approve of the final choice. After Brando won, Sinatra told the press Brando was the most overrated actor on the planet. He also referred to him as Mumbles. Marlon had used the famous method acting technique, which Sinatra felt was hogwash. The next year, they were both cast in the film adaptation of Guys and Dolls. Sinatra was apparently fired up when Brando was given the romantic lead in the movie, Sky Masterson, and made that publicly known. To his credit, Brando tried to patch things up by coming to Sinatra for vocal lessons and dancing tips, since these were not a part of his particular skill set. Sinatra was so annoyed by the casting and by Brando's method acting, he refused to help his co-star, and that was that. For the rest of shooting, if the pair wanted to communicate with each other, they only did so through intermediaries. And the rift was so bad, the entire cast and crew were obligated to be on one side or the other. Brando messed with Sinatra by asking for multiple takes in scenes with him, knowing full well Sinatra preferred as few takes as possible. That's when things took a potentially even uglier turn. Brando was jumped one night after shooting by two unknown men. While he couldn't prove it, Brando was certain they had been mafia cohorts of Sinatra's, who had been sent there to rough him up. Brando took the hint and decided to never speak publicly about Sinatra after the incident. Now it's time to hear from you. Which of these feuds was most surprising to hear about? Let us know in the comments section below. And before you go, make sure you give this video a like and subscribe to Facts First if you haven't already. Click the bell icon to stay updated on all our latest content.